Welcome to this explainer. Look, we're jumping right in today because we are tackling a concept that's, frankly, a bit uncomfortable, but absolutely fascinating: selective Christianity. It's a deep dive into human nature, specifically our tendency to treat some moral failings as massive, world-ending deals while conveniently sweeping others completely under the rug. So, what exactly is selective morality? Basically, it's this incredibly common habit of treating certain sins as grave offenses while totally giving a pass to others just because they're a bit more socially acceptable. It's this weird dynamic where we construct our own personalized, custom-built lists of what is and isn't okay, rather than actually sticking to an objective standard. Which brings us to a highly provocative question that really anchors our whole discussion today. Do we actually hate all sin equally? It's the kind of question that forces you to take a long, hard look in the mirror. When we say we stand for moral integrity, are we being consistent, or are we just picking and choosing the rules that are easiest for us to follow? Section 1. Condemned versus excused. Think about what we usually consider the obvious sins, things like murder, adultery, drunkenness, drug abuse, and idolatry. Society, and let's be real, religious communities, are super quick to condemn these. And it makes sense, right? They're highly visible, they cause obvious destruction, and taking a hard stance against them gets you pretty much universal applause. But then, notice the stark contrast with what we might call our respectable sins: gossip, pride, complaining, laziness, jealousy, greed, unforgiveness, anger. We kind of just brush these off, don't we? We write them off as mere personality quirks or just blowing off steam. But structurally speaking, these are still moral failings. They just happen to be the ones we've decided are culturally okay. Section 2, Side by Side, the Double Standard. Let's put this double standard to the test using Matthew chapter 5. We all universally condemn murder as the ultimate crime, no question. Yet as the text points out, we frequently excuse harboring deep-seated hatred or anger in our hearts. Theologically, the root issue, that contempt for another human being, is exactly the same, even if the earthly fallout looks completely different. You see the exact same dynamic a few verses later. Religious groups will fiercely judge and even excommunicate someone for physical adultery. But at the same time, we quietly minimize private lust. We condemn the action, sure, but we treat the internal condition that leads to the action like it's a completely normal, harmless reality. It is a massive double standard. Or how about a real-world, everyday example? Most people would never dream of literally stealing an item off a store shelf. But dishonesty in business, padding a time card, or slightly misrepresenting a product, people just brush that off as corporate savvy or just how things get done. We literally rebrand the sin just to make it palatable. When you step back, the whole pattern boils down to this staggering contrast. We violently reject what happens in public, but we are totally fine tolerating what we can hide in secret. If a moral failing threatens our reputation, we condemn it. If we can keep it behind closed doors, we excuse it. It suddenly becomes way less about morality and a whole lot more about public relations. Section 3. The Biblical Standard. This brings us to a foundational text, James 2:10, which says, "For whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking all of it." That is a heavy statement. It powerfully asserts that you can't just pick and choose. You can't keep 99% of the rules, excuse the 1% you find annoying, and claim you're keeping the law. The standard is all or nothing. And the reason the standard is so strict is crystal clear in the theology. Every single sin is a rebellion against God. Obviously, earthly consequences are different. Murder puts you in prison, while greed might just make you a bad neighbor. But the spiritual weight of any rebellion remains profoundly serious. A quote-unquote small sin is still a rejection of divine authority, so it literally cannot be minimized. Jesus himself hammered this exact point home in Matthew 23. He severely rebuked the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day. Why? Because they were obsessively focused on minor religious checklists, getting every tiny detail perfectly right while completely ghosting the weightier matters of the law, like justice, mercy, and faithfulness. They cared about the tiny things, but ignored the commands that required actual, transformative love. Section 4. The Ultimate Challenge. So where does this leave us? Well, it's time to ask ourselves some really hard questions. First, are we judging by God's standards or by society's standards? Whose moral compass are you actually following every day? Because if we only care about the sins that will get us canceled or ostracized by our peers, we are just following the crowd, not the divine standard.
Secondly, do we repent only of the sins people can actually see? This cuts right to the heart of the matter. Are we just managing our public image, curating this version of ourselves that looks incredibly righteous on the outside? Or are we genuinely dealing with the hidden, messy, authentic condition of our hearts when absolutely no one else is watching?
Fixing this requires a massive shift in perspective. It means throwing out our personalized lists of acceptable flaws. Instead of constantly asking, can I get away with this? Or is this normal? The true standard is simply asking, does this please God? And look, since the answer will inevitably be no sometimes, the next step isn't making excuses. It's to repent and seek grace. I want to leave you with this ultimate challenge, a provocative thought to carry with you long after this explainer is over. This isn't just about avoiding a specific list of bad behaviors. It all boils down to this. Is Christ Lord over every single area of our lives, or only the areas we find easy to surrender? It demands absolute honesty. Are you willing to move past selective morality and step into true, uncompromised integrity? Think on that.